Chapter 4. All those who wander are not lost. Motorcycle patch from my stall. I've never been to the Sydney headquarters of the transport company I'd worked for in Beachtown. It was absolutely massive. The reception was the size of a 5-star hotel. I told the receptionist that I used to work in Beachtown and wanted to talk to someone in person about why I ended my contract so abruptly. The only person who I knew to speak to, was a manager who managed the drivers. He'd resigned about the same time as me. He'd sent a text to me asking if I was alright and offering to be a reference for me if I needed. The receptionist seemed to search her memory for the guy. I was talking about. She then said, "Oh yes, I remember him. That was a long time ago." I guess it was. And that kind of place probably rolled through employees in tough jobs, not giving a shit that they quit over dissatisfaction. They just got more fresh meat. So I added that I could drive if they needed drivers. She nodded her head emphatically in the affirmative. Of course they did, because people like me quit all the time. She called the HR person to come out and speak to me. HR was just a desk jockey, like any other in a huge company. I doubted she was across the shit going on in the various warehouses all over the country. She stood near the reception desk and spoke to me instead of inviting me into her office. My courage dropped. What did I expect? This place wasn't about drivers, it was about sales, marketing and admin. She suggested I send my resume through to her and wrote down her email address. I wanted to say, "You've got my resume, my details, everything, because I used to be a contractor." I didn't though. I couldn't believe that the two I see who answered to the actual queen bee of this company had taken the time out to speak to me that day a couple of years ago. I'd blown my chances and it was my own fault really. If I was going to quit, I should have taken them all down as I had nothing to lose. I didn't feel good about that whole interaction. I headed to Beachtown for old time's sake. Swimming in the beautiful old deco baths would soothe my disappointment. It was freezing, but I got through it. Icy plunges are all the rage now. I'd been doing them since my days of living in Melbourne and hitting the St Kilda baths. Spa, steam room, ran into the freezing ocean. There was no thalassotherapy here. It was just pure, exhilarating ocean water. Followed by a warm shower in the lovely old roofless bathrooms. As I was loading my wet togs into the side of my van, I noticed the front passenger side wheel had a massive egg in it, with the tyre tread worn down to the metallic thread. I got such a shock. I'd done over 100 kilometres per hour on the highway to get here. This could have easily blown out and sent me out of control. Thank goodness I noticed it. I immediately rang the tyre mob I used to go to when I lived in Beachtown. They were a heavy-duty supplier who sold small and large truck tyres. My 15-minute drive to their store in the industrial area had me white-knuckling the steering wheel, hoping the inevitable wasn't going to happen. That'd be the irony of life, 5 kilometres away from a tyre change when it decided to blow. The boomer guy at the tyre place hadn't changed. He spoke reservedly to me like I was a threat or something. I don't know why, and I didn't care. Just do a good job with my tyres. I showed him the tyre and he said I needed a wheel alignment. We don't do those, you'll have to go somewhere else. They're a large industrial tyre place and they don't do wheel alignments on anything bigger than a car. Why the fuck had I been bothering with them and their attitude towards me? More disappointment. Oh well, I'd go find another wheel alignment place once they'd fitted the new tyre. I looked through their back fence as I sat outside smoking a durry waiting for the tyre to be fitted. The warehouse I used to work in backed onto this business, which was why I used them in the first place. I saw the warehouse supervisor, the mean bitch's car parked along the warehouse back wall. I'm right here. I could march in there and give her an absolute serve, then ask to see the manager, a very hands-off, powerless guy who was more concerned with sales and problems in the warehouse. I weighed it all up and decided it would get me nowhere. And there she was, plugging away in a job that gave her the only power she felt in her small parochial life. I was adventuring around the country, living spontaneously and no longer having to put up with the collective depression happening in that warehouse. And the company didn't look after me anyway, so why go back in? It was therapeutic. The Thai joint manager came whistling out, all excited. He said that a plate behind the wheel hadn't been placed back on properly. My mind searched for where I'd gotten that tyre replaced. Could be anywhere in this country during the lap. I remembered it was a truck tyre mob in Kalgoorlie. I even remember the tyre truck blokes being unfriendly to me, despite the receptionists being nice, normal women. My anger at how these women-hating cockheads had put me in danger, either purposely or carelessly, soon wore off with the relief that I wouldn't have to book in somewhere for a wheel alignment. The manager's excitement turned patronising when he said, "Couldn't you feel the wobble in the steering?" I actually did, but I put it down to the heavy sheet of marine ply I'd strapped up to make a false ceiling and store all sorts of stuff underneath it. I hate it when you have to justify this stuff like it was your fault in the first place. I'd never been to a shonky tyre joint before, so I didn't know that they could fuck up like this. So give me a break. I hoped I never had to come back here again. I headed to Weed Town in the north of the state. I absolutely love that place. The showgrounds are cheap to camp in, and the main street is so eclectic, it makes you wish all country towns' main streets were like this. Sure, you get offered drugs a lot, but they're not Esche grommets with Gucci bags slung over their shoulder. They're all burnt out hippies trying to make a buck. And the Weed Town Hemp Embassy dispensary is there. I stocked up on my THC oil and grabbed a CBD vape while I was at it. I walked all the way to the old butter factory where it was now housed, and on my way back, along the main street, I picked up a bag of Weed Town's finest. At least I hope so. My tolerance for smoking weed was so low that even if it was shit, I'd get a buzz. I asked the bloke for mushrooms, my other favourite drug, and he said to come back tomorrow. I sure would. Back in the campsite, a very cool wild child called Sapphire pulled up her 70s caravan alongside my van setup. We got chatting and it turned out that she was from Maltford. She was travelling alone with her 2 dogs and was just cruising around, no definite destination. I get the feeling that she might have been in Weed Town for wholesale purposes. When I said I was going to school mushies tomorrow, she seemed concerned and said I should watch what I was buying. She offered to try and get some for me from a local friend of hers. I decided it might be too much mucking around. I really didn't think these dealers would sell you dodgy, poisonous mushrooms, as they're always in the street and would be really easily identifiable. I wandered along the street at the agreed upon time the next day. The bloke was nowhere to be found. Instead, I saw a character that I'd run into a year or so before while I was waiting outside the old shop that the dispensary used to be run out of. There were various blokes of different social groups, tradies, old hippies, younger hippies. This one guy, who seemed pretty out there, started talking to me in a really low, growly voice, like he was possessed. The others told him to lay off me, but I took it all in my stride. He said that I used to be one of his wives back in the can't remember what days. He said there were rape ceremonies that trained the women how to be wives. Again, I just put it down to being an hallucinogen tragic. I walked past him this day and he asked if I wanted pot. I said I was after mushrooms and he replied in the affirmative. I waited while he took off somewhere to get them. It was a mucky bag of dried mushrooms, some whole, most in crumbs. He put his gnarled up, dirty fingernail hands in the bag and brought them to the opening to show me they were real. I didn't doubt him, but I made a mental note to pour them up in tea by way of disinfecting them, instead of just chewing on them whole like I usually did. They were $100 and I blanched a bit at the price. Mushrooms are hard for me to find myself, so I had to pay for them. It was my turn to head off to one of the few overworked ATMs in the main street for the cash. I was so excited to get mushies. It had been years since I'd had any. I'm not a tripping balls type of person when it came to psilocybin. I really liked a small dose that just gave me a nice body stone, like taking a Valium without the hangover. And the sleep I got from them was similar too. Everything was just calmly nice on a microdose of psilocybin. I like the clarity of mind I got the next day after taking them. I do think it improves creativity, and the permanently trippy state of my plug spelt that the shrooms were probably pretty strong and would go further with me. That night at our campsite, I gave Sapphire a raw one to chew on while I sampled one myself, ignoring my previous thought of boiling them first. I wanted to road test a little to make sure I wasn't going to get sick off them. Sapphire was in for a penny, in for a pound. They must have been pretty old, as I felt nothing. I was also adding crumbs of weed into my cigarettes though, so it's hard to tell what drug was working on what. Sapphire and I sat in a caravan annex sharing stories and laughing our guts up. She had a perpetual, non-stop sense of humour with an infectious, throaty laugh. It was never a chore to laugh along with her. She should have been on the stage. A little later that evening, after we'd both gone to bed, we heard a helicopter landing in the middle of the show ring. Sapphire came out of her van in her dressing gown, and I jumped out to lean against the big old wooden fence also. We were all parked up against the circumference of it, so we had prime seats. On the other side of the ring, we saw a couple of ambulances coming into the ring. Someone was a casualty of something, and the quickest way to the nearest hospital was to avoid the windy, blind corner potholed roads that led in both directions out of Weedtown. It could be anything from overdose to murder, such was the drug culture of the town. We toddled back to bed after we watched the chopper heavily lift off the ground and sweep off to the side after it had cleared the ring's fences. The next morning, Sapphire had gotten the goss about last night. Apparently a car had gone out of control on the main street, took out a pedestrian and ploughed into the post that held up the veranda of the town's sole pub. The rumour was that it was a deliberate hit and run and the driver hadn't gotten away with it. When I went up the street later on, I saw it parked up on some garden beds where it had come to a standstill. Building supports were already installed under the pub veranda. What a mess. As much as I love Weedtown, there were social problems. I don't know whether it was drug dealer wars, but you can't help suspect it here. Everyone was trying to make a buck after all. I went and found the tripper from the day before and scored another bag of shrooms off him. He walked down the little lane up the main street and I realised he must hide his stash off his person under one of the shops. Clever. As he walked up to me, he didn't realise I was watching him. He was talking to himself and picking up rocks on the track. For a brief moment, I wondered if he was going to throw them in with the shrooms, so it weighed more. When he saw me, he threw the rocks away. Of course, there'd be a bit of ripping off going on with the main street dealers, particularly with blow-through customers like me. And what would I do if I realised I'd been ripped off? Can't exactly take it to the cops. Since I was all set with my natural narcotic needs, I decided to head out of Weedtown that day. I was heading to Moree to stay at a van park with hot thermal pools. It was winter, so they'd be beautiful to experience. Janine, who'd come to my rescue in Umpinpin that day, had put me onto the thermal pools trail that ran from mid-central New South Wales all the way up to north-central Queensland. I figured it had something to do with a fault line underground. I'd been to the Inot Hot Springs one on the northern Queensland tablelands, a very quiet caravan park with little indoor pools that varied in temperature, the hottest being very hot, and you had to graduate yourself through the less hot ones first. It sat on the banks of a small river-sanded creek. You could find the source of heat with your feet on the sand, then dig out a small puddle for yourself. I loved the natural setting of this, though you had to be careful not to burn yourself, as it got scalding in some places. After that, I was going to drop in on a woman from the Women Travellers FB site who'd said to drop in on my way through. The low I'd been in at Bellies and Umpinpin had certainly disappeared. All I needed was a change of scenery, an adventure, a challenge. The Moree pools were very different to the far NQ ones. A huge caravan park that was absolutely packed with grey nomads. The pools were massive and filled with boomer bodies, some of which seemed to be speaking in Russian, a tool group. The 3 pools had signs with the temperature of each pool. None of them were as hot as Inot Springs. They should make that their slogan. I found myself missing that place as I walked around in my togs, sampling each pool and being watched by all the other patrons. I'm not embarrassed by my body, like so many women unfortunately are. It's sturdy, muscly, and its strength has made me a lot of money in its ability to do hard work and heavy lifting. I don't even hate my soft menopausal belly that's subsumed where my small waistline used to be. Apparently we pack on fat around our organs to keep them warm, since our body temperature is all over the place with hormone dips, hence hot flashes. I was sure experiencing them. I just didn't want to be people watched. It was a nice night there, with friendly grey 9-eyed couple neighbours. In the morning I watched a bloke undo his caravan stands with a ratchet tool. I commented that I was glad I didn't have to do that, just shut my van doors and go. He agreed and said my simple setup looked great. The main thing is you're out there doing it. If you found yourself around good boomer couples, they certainly did feel like a community, with their carefree lives full of encouragement. Opalton is a bit out of the way. It's a wild place full of opal mining camps. I'd barely spoken to this woman, Debbie, just a couple of direct messages on FB. She hadn't been the one to invite me initially anyway. It was another woman who tagged her into the thread because Debbie rode a motorcycle. There wasn't much on her profile and it was private anyway, so I didn't even know what she looked like. We even still communicated via text when I got to Opalton, where she suggested I meet her in the town's information centre car park. An old car pulled up, and a short, very wizened woman with cropped, multicoloured hair that she'd described in her text slowly dragged her carcass out. She wouldn't even have been 40 kilos wringing wet. My first impression was, she's gay. I hope she didn't think I was too, and this was a hookup of sorts. She had a rough little cigarette voice, and she said to follow her up to her mining camp. I was curious, but understandably nervous. Here goes. It wasn't exactly a camp, more like a cute little beach house. And it wasn't that tiny either, quite a home really. She showed me around a bit and organised a long lead that I could run to my van. She made a thing about parking my van out the front, where the lead could reach, and parking her car behind me. She explained that I could then turn to my left and go out the other road to get out of the place. So I'm not parking you in. That was fine, and a relief really. She wasn't trying to trap me there. But why explain something I'd not suspected in the first place? Her lounge room was really cosy, and I poured myself my own drinks out of a bottle of Coke I'd bought. Can't be too careful. She put on some YouTube and asked what I wanted to watch. I couldn't think of anything, so she put on Itchy Boots, a solo woman motorcyclist who was going through the African continent during her last episode. I couldn't really watch it as Debbie talked the whole time through it. She bitched about her sister who'd come to visit, a Sydney snob. Then she decided to tell me her whole story, pouring big bourbons as she went. She'd bought this place after splitting up with her ex-husband. I didn't expect that. She went into a whole DV episode that she'd had with him. She looked like she'd be easy to beat up, until a twist came in the story. The cops had turned around and arrested her for DV, despite her calling them. The stories didn't stop there. She showed me a picture of a motorcycle, saying it was parked at her ex's, the same ex who'd accused her of DV. She said she still had a lot to do with him. He's my best mate. So she no longer rode a motorcycle by the look of things, and the look of her. I then wondered to myself if there was some meth involved in her life, in her look. The place was too neat for that, I hoped to myself. Something else weird. There were a lot of things that were weird. She mentioned that she'd been working at the local chemist's in town. Her bathroom was so absolutely chock full of bottles and products that it looked like she could open up her own pharmacy in there. She certainly didn't look like she took care of her skin, and I wondered if she was a bit of a klepto. Nothing would surprise me. She then showed me her gem polishing workroom out the back. It was certainly well set up. I wondered if she was still doing that. She said that she'd lost her will to live and to eat, which was obvious, when the relationship had fallen apart. I'm an empathetic person, but I started to feel overwhelmed by how shitty her life was as she described it. I was tempted to say, but you've got this place, and it's really nice. She also showed me an old Toyota Cruiser bus, painted olive green, that she'd bought with the divorce settlement money. She sadly explained that she hadn't gotten it together to go camping in it yet, making some excuse that I can't even remember. Again, I wanted to shake her tiny frame and say, snap out of it. You've got a lot of good things here to distract yourself from your blues. For fuck's sakes, use them. There was a pit out the back of the place where she explained that I could have a dig and find gemstones if I wanted to. What a cool hobby. And right at her back door. The next bit of info was the last straw for me. She said that there were a lot of blokes who lived nearby with their own camps. 2 of them would visit her from time to time. She whinged about them always being drunk, and when they'd visit, they just sat on a couch and didn't say much. I was kind of understanding towards them, as Debbie could talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles. I know it's hard to be lonely and clutch onto any bit of company like it was a lifeline. You'll probably meet these blokes, she informed me, with a tone of hopelessness in her voice. Great. So there were going to be 2 piss wrecks who only bathed themselves when they jumped in the bore pools, Opalton's contribution to the Thermal Springs tourist route, that would show up here. And my friend Debbie here didn't have the strength to not invite them in. I wondered what else they took for granted in this house that was obviously much nicer than whatever dilapidation they lived in. I wouldn't have said that Debbie wasn't a safe person. I would say that I didn't feel safe staying at her place. It was still daylight when I made excuses about being tired from the road and took myself to bed. She was still falling over herself with hospitality, which I felt guilty about. When you travel solo like I do, vibes is vibes, and they're the only friend I've got. I locked myself very tightly in the van and snacked on a packet of chips for dinner. I wasn't looking forward to the hunger headache that awaited me in the morning. And it was such a shame that I couldn't properly enjoy the beautiful winter morning in this moon landscape of a place. I sat and drank my coffee that I brewed on my little gas bottle ring and smoked a durry while I worked out how I was going to make my exit. It was way worse than I expected. Debbie said she'd given me a bit of space to wake up, thankfully. I went into the house to break the news. She was sitting in the same armchair she occupied last night. I told her that I was going to get going this morning. Is it something I said? I know I talk too much. I assured her that it wasn't that. I didn't have an excuse other than I wanted to get going. But I was looking forward to getting to know you. Another wave of guilt coursed through me. The woman wasn't going to stop bleeding, and I knew for certain if I'd have tried to offer some positive advice to cheer her up, she would have made excuses for why she couldn't take action. I'd brought in the bag of Weed Town weed and offered to put some in her bowl. I was deeply relieved that I hadn't smoked any last night. I would have been laying awake and jumping at every sound outside the van. She didn't want to take the weed, but I insisted it was the least I could do, etc. I managed to extricate myself out of there, saying big, loud, cheerful statements of thanks, best of luck, hope you get to drive your van someday. She followed me out like a stray puppy. For some reason, this angered me. I know it's not normal to feel anger when someone makes you feel guilty, but I felt resentment that my safety could have been compromised by her loser neighbours. As I drove out round the escape route she thankfully showed me, I said out loud and didn't care if she heard, "Oh, you talk too much? No shit." My mood swung back and forth from anger to guilt as I headed north out of Opalton, and sadness that I didn't get a chance to really check this place out. Something else eventually occurred to me. Maybe there were bad plans for me, and this Debbie woman, as hopeless as she was the bait. You can't call that paranoia, as there's absolutely no way of knowing if that were the case. I was relieved that she was so shit at making me feel comfortable staying there. Sure, she bent over backwards the whole time, asking me if I wanted to lay down on the couch instead of sitting up, peppering her tales of woe with asking me if I wanted this, that, or the other. You could put that down to her being an unrelaxed host who tries too hard because she doesn't usually have guests. And that made me feel like a bitch. But the other side of it is, maybe it was her job to keep me there. Beyond the piss wrecks, I wondered about her DVX. He'd obviously got her so head-fucked that she'd probably do absolutely anything for him. Like luring a woman off the internet to a place of lawlessness where there are so many holes in the ground to cover up bodies that it's probably renowned for unsolved missing persons cases. I'll never know if that was a close call or not. Me and my preference for making friends with women because they're, by and large, safer, they aren't. But I will argue that there's usually an evil male in the background who's benefiting off the friendships that the woman makes. I'd had a few like that in my life. They weren't in such a dishevelled, hopeless state as Debbie. They relied on a kind of cult of personality to suck you in. I met a woman called Ray at a bike show in Bogantown. She was about 10 years older than me, blonde, and would have been a total hit with males when she was younger. She still carried that Susie Quattro motorcycle mama look and would have used it to her advantage. Ray had a stall of second-hand clothes and she had an absolute army of people helping her out. She was pretty gruff to me at first, possibly jealous that I was making lots of sales. It was a bike show full of males who needed my stuff. Cheap biker wraparound sunnies because they'd lost theirs on the road, patches that read, "Loud pipes save lives," all must-haves in the biker world. It wasn't my fault that there weren't women there who wanted expensive vintage clothes. She changed her attitude and wanted to befriend me. This phenomenon happened to me too sometimes. I should have read it for what it was. Ray was so hell-bent on being my friend that she asked me over to stay the night instead of driving the long journey back to the Hunter Valley. She'd turned on her charm and had a great wicked sense of humour, which I welcomed after living with my high-maintenance landlady, Madeline. Ray was also living a sober life from alcohol and drugs, another reason to like her. I left there planning to stay in touch. I'm not one to do all the contacting with new friends, preferring to let it happen naturally. I don't know if it was natural, but Ray was ringing me at least once a week. My friends are all a bit busy with their lives and don't ring that often. I really welcome this, living my hermit life on the mountain. Didn't take long for her to start showing red flags. The way she love-bombed me for one, while also unable to conceal a bit of condescension towards me. I didn't take offense, I just put that down to her childhood filled with sexual abuse that she'd trauma dumped on me pretty early, and also survival as a past heroin junkie. She was very intelligent and I really respected this above all. I should have gotten out when she started to bitch about the nice people who hung around her for her addictive personality. They weren't helping her with her clothing business enough, according to her. She had a whole setup in her garage, full of racks of clothing that would have been too hard to afford on the disability pension. And her house was an absolute 3-bedroom mansion for a subsidized household tenant with only her adult son living there. Everything Ray did was for her own benefit, her own elevation. I went and stayed with her after I'd left a teaching job I was doing at a nearby minimum security prison. I was really low after this. Ray tried to offer support, but it wasn't in her. I helped her out with her garage clothing business in exchange for just being able to stay there, even buying some clothes at full price. They weren't cheap. I had a second-hand motorcycle in the back of my van that I'd bought on impulse and now regretted because it was too heavy for me. Classic depression symptom. This was when the arsehole behind the shady lady showed his true colours. A nondescript, skippy biker male around Ray's age. I'd met him once at her house before. He wasn't the friendliest to me, but I expected he wasn't the friendliest to anyone. Ray was on the phone to him and she came to me and said that he would give me $2,000 for the bike. He hadn't even set eyes on it. I was angry that she'd told him about the bike and would have also told him that I'd just left my job. So he was trying to use this as leverage in the hopes that I'd do a desperation sale, despite the bike being worth at least $10,000. I surprised myself by showing my anger to Ray, because I was a bit nervous around her. I have this thing with older women. I always defer to them with elder status. I didn't aim my anger at her, but at him for trying to cheat me out of the bike's worth. She was apologetic about it and we left it at that. I think that spelled the nail in the coffin for our friendship. During that visit, she got really pissed off with me that I wasn't helping her lay pavers to make a courtyard for her garage shop. I quickly packed up all my stuff after I saw her frustration. I really didn't know which way it would go with her and I opted for self-protection rather than try to explain my point of view. I camped at a rest stop north of Canberra and I got a phone call from her in the middle of the night. I ignored it and instead texted her what was on my mind all along. I would never ask you to help me with my stall. If you need to rely on friends to work your business for free, you're not the businesswoman that you think you are. I was speaking on behalf of all the friends she'd trashed to me, who'd drawn up boundaries on how much help they'd given her. She wasn't the most adept cult leader, but this didn't stop her trying to be one. I was so upset by this whole thing and missed her phone calls when I was back in my cabin. It was a lesson learned that women can be just as, if not more, manipulative than men. I don't blame solo mother survivors for whatever hustle they've got to do, but they should only take advantage of males, not team up with them to take advantage of women who only want to be their friend. So with Debbie, I was yet again disappointed that my search for solo travelling, free women like me, hadn't turned out as I'd hoped. The whole endeavour of finding my tribe was ending up in weird places. I'm pretty good at seeing through people when I'm not giving in to loneliness and looking for company. It would never stop me from being open to it though, and I felt fortunate after meeting Debbie. She had the peace and safety of her home, and it still wasn't bringing her contentment. If I could find contentment on the road, then I was truly living life on my own terms, not subject to my own loneliness. I did have a good theory on loneliness that had evaded me when I was sitting still in house sits. Loneliness is the most easily cured of emotions. If you set your mind right, you could find company and interactions with strangers or friends not yet met, through people working behind counters offering that small town hospitality. Spreading friendliness wherever I went was both an antidote for me and for the people I interacted with. I knew the curiosity for new faces when you're stuck in one place, seeing the same folks. Travellers did spread bonhomie as they welcomed conversations with people because they were solo, or they were coupled and wanted to talk to someone who wasn't their spouse. So I had two groups of people to tap into for a reprieve from my loneliness. Attitude of gratitude comes into play. I stopped at various little Western Queensland country towns on my journey north. There was another beautiful thermal pool spot in Cunnamulla. They'd really dressed up their bore water pools in a ritzy day spa joint that sat on a riverbank and had views of it as you rested on elbows on the pool's concrete sides. There was even an indoor atrium pool with the hottest temperatures that resembled a true bathhouse with skylight and intricate tiling. The price matched the fancy design, but it was well worth it. I usually felt a bit of depression in outback Queensland after years of visiting the depressed little town of Coaltown for supplies when we worked the cattle property. The bougainvillea planted by town councils was a trigger. So it was wonderful to see some city-fied things arriving in these places, to bring them out of the long ago 80s boom. Further north, all towns were doing well off mining booms. They still had their struggles though. I stayed in a van park in Mount Isa with the friendliest woman on reception. She and her husband were travellers also and had taken the caretaking job on offer here for the tourist season. There's a lot of youth crime around, which I don't believe should be fully blamed on Aboriginal youth. Poverty in these places isn't limited to only community people, and there's a fair bit of easy opportunity happening. I'd stayed at this van park before on a solo motorcycle trip I did down the width of Australia on the long Stuart Highway. A copper on holidays had his Land Cruiser stolen by said youth from this very van park. I brought this up with the caretaker, who wasn't working there when this happened. These kids don't usually hotwire vehicles, they're not that advanced. I expressed wonder at why a copper of all people wouldn't keep his keys away from his unattended vehicle. She agreed. Not to victim blame, but everyone needed to have a city approach to country crime now. Always locked, even when you go to the bathroom. The journey through the rest of Queensland and into the Northern Territory was pretty uneventful. I went to weird little museums that I never would have usually. And in the NT, those attractions just got bigger and better, more beautiful. I can't stand those stickers that say, "See you in the NT," spelling cunts in big letters. Mataranka Springs and Bitter Springs are wonders of nature and beat the shit out of any thermal pools I'd ever been to. I guess that sticker is about the people in NT being cunts, original owners excluded. They were a special breed. It's the Wild West. A visit to the Daily Waters pub proved that. Absolutely chockers with people who'd had that bumper sticker. And the owners had one overworked backpacker behind the bar who also had to do van park check-ins. I walked out after a while and went and stayed at the Servo on the highway. I'd organised a stay with an old friend from Brownsville days. I hadn't seen Lee since we were in our 20s. She'd moved up to the NT to teach, married a truckie, and cracked out a couple of kids. I'd always liked Lee. I remember visiting her when she was teaching in a depressing little ville south of Brownsville. Lee wasn't depressed. She was doing lots of art and had a really good attitude to life. I was, and I drank my way through the weekend. If only I could get that lust for life that Lee had, I thought to myself. I was a long way away from giving up the grog, so that wasn't going to happen. I really wanted to show Lee that I was sober and in a good place. It was going to be great. Maybe I'd find a member of my tribe. Lee lived down on acreage about 5 kilometres out of Gorgetown, a large centre on the Stewart Highway south of Darwin. Her husband, Bluey, he had red hair and truckies give the most obvious nicknames to each other, no longer drove cattle trucks. He'd sold up and was now running a landscaping business. I should have picked it in Lee in the beginning. She wasn't that happy to see me. I don't think it was personal. It was just unhappiness. Damn. I think she was a bit embarrassed about her house. I don't know why. It was very cool. The kitchen was one building, and there were 2 others that housed the bedrooms and lounge room. They were all connected with open-air breezeways. Living outside is the way to go in hot places like Gorgetown. She had horses, a couple of shipping containers packed to the roof with art supplies. I saw the signs of disorganized mess throughout them and again wondered about her state of mind. I guess that was why she was a bit embarrassed about having someone visit. Lee was teaching art at the high school. She said she loved it, so that was good. Lee would have been great with community kids, of which there were a lot. I found out the source of her unhappiness that night when we sat around an outside fire. Her 2 boys, primary school age, stayed inside and watched telly, while Bluey proceeded to drink a lot. He knew I'd done truck driving as a job, and he proceeded to trash the reputation of a female truckie he worked with. He slut-shamed the hell out of her, calling her a buffalo. I didn't know what to say. Lee ended up going to bed. I wished I could, but I got the vibe that if I appeared rude to Bluey, it would spell trouble. So I stayed up and listened to his drunken shit. I really resented doing this as it looked like I enjoyed his company. I slept in an old miner's donga with a double bed and calcium-encrusted bathroom. It was great accommodation and I could have stayed a while, if only. Bluey had offered me some work in his landscaping business. I was reticent about how that'd go, but I signed up for it anyway. The first job was so ridiculously hard that I thought it was a wind-up. A house that had sat empty for 2 years with a yard completely covered in vine. There were big lumps in the vines under which there were trees and bushes. It looked snaky as all fuck, and luckily it wasn't. I did expect to find a body under the green carpet though. Bluey didn't work on this job. I worked with a young fella from Tiwi Islands. He was gentle. He'd moved there to be with his girlfriend. They were 19-year-old parents. Nothing else to do, I suppose. The young fella operated the machinery such as the hedge trimmer, whippersnipper and chainsaw. I followed along behind him and rolled the vine into balls nearly the size of those big cylindrical hay ones. It was so physical I thought I'd pass out. Then we had to throw them over a high fence, walk around and hoist them onto a big trailer. I felt real pressure to keep up. We got heaps done the first day and I felt a lot of satisfaction. The pressure was gone. While driving back in the ute, I don't know how we got onto the subject of gay people, but the nice kid went dark and started to accuse them all of being pedos. Young men who were radicalized by ridiculous, dangerous shit on the internet. I said to him that there were far bigger problems than gay people trying to turn the kids gay. It was young males filming girls they were having sex with and uploading it for other males to get hard over. I said that this seemed like some weird gay shit to me. He, of course, had nothing to say to that. Because I was relegated to only using non-power tools when Lee, the boys, and I were shopping in the town's extremely popular camping store, I found myself a cheap machete in the gun department. I'd never seen so many weapons, and so cheap. Lee questioned why the hell I'd want that. We all need some protection as solo women campers, for a start. And if I was ever to cut back a vine-covered yard again, I had a machete to help with the job. I'd grown up with cane knives, basically machetes, but a bigger, wider blade specially crafted to cut cane the old-school way. So this thing felt familiar in my hands. I doubted I'd ever use it, even for landscaping. Lee went to Darwin for her eldest boy's sports camp. It was just Bluey, me, and her younger boy. I felt so damn sorry for these boys. Before they left for Darwin, while Lee was still at work, I walked out to the patio and witnessed Bluey slap the older one fair across the face. It was so degrading for the poor kid. He'd been really disrespectful to Lee the day before when we were driving somewhere without Bluey. Lee had obviously told him, and this was how he handled it. I wasn't a child psychologist, but I could see what was happening here. The older kid was watching heaps of very fucked up YouTube, talk about pedos influencing kids, all that Andrew Tate influenced content that jokes about raping little girls, grown women, and other revoltingly weird shit that kids think is edgy. Along with this stuff, the older boy was furious with Lee for not protecting him from Bluey. He was still too little to take on Bluey's violence. I really hoped he'd grow up big enough to flatten him one day. It wouldn't be hard. Bluey was only 60 kilos wringing wet. I also felt sorry for the younger one. He tried so hard to be the good kid, the mediator, doing whatever he could to escape both Bluey and Lee's wrath. I witnessed Lee lose her shit and scream so loud at those boys that it left a ringing in my ears. The whole thing was awful, but Bluey was paying me good cash money for the week. I lasted a week by making excuses about not eating too much meat and cooked and ate my meals outside my donga. Mealtimes are always hell in abusive households. It makes me wonder why they don't just all eat in front of the telly. It's not like the formality of sitting up at the dinner table was setting a good example. Lee yelled at least once, and Bluey took heavy-handed action. I grew up in a very unhappy household also. It wasn't violent, but we did have to endure my unhappy mother and my father at the head of the table who'd only talk to my older brother at the other head of the table. We in the middle were invisible. I couldn't help but act up at this neglect. I didn't cop a backhander because I was a girl. My younger brother did the same thing as this young one, behaved himself like his little life depended on it. The backhanders I copped were from my older brother. Not at the table, but nonetheless, no one stopped him. Damn, Lee was not my tribe. There was nothing I could say, nothing I could do. No one would listen to partnerless, childless me. I was relieved as hell when I headed for Darwin with a pocket full of hungies. It had been a long time since I'd touched those notes. I felt a tinge of regret at not being able to get some truck driving experience in with Bluey's old business. They were out of my license class, but it would have been good to get some practice in semis. At the end of the day, how could I expect that experience to go any way but south? Bluey had explained to his youngest fella that there were 3 types of truckies: steering wheel operators, some other type that I don't remember, and finally real truckies like Bluey who owned, operated and serviced their own trucks. I said to the young fella a bit dejectedly, "Well, I'm just a steering wheel operator." There was a slight look of shock on his face as he realised he'd unwittingly walked into an insult. Bluey said nothing but looked glowering at both of us. Sexist cunt.